Okay, this is a real spread.
You following a reading of the Shir?
He's all caught up.
How do you translate that?
I don't speak Hebrew.
Okay. So thank God, we've made it through all 8 prakim of the basic translation of Shir HaShirim. So what I was hoping to start doing now is gain a better understanding of what the Megillah is about. Welcome. Starting with why it was written, how it made it into Tanakh, all of those kinds of things. We ended last week with a quote, and I wanted to start this week with a much more extensive quote. I will kind of leave these things just dangling, and you can sort of decide for yourself what the application is to the topic at hand. This quote is from C.S. Lewis. You might know C.S. Lewis from the Chronicles of Narnia. The latter couple books were a little weird, but he was a very prolific and well-known theologian.
Good religious man.
Yeah, good religious man, for sure. He wrote the Screw Tape Letters, which is excellent. He wrote, under a pseudonym originally, a very powerful and honest book on like grief called Grief Observed. He also wrote what's called Reflections on the Psalms on Tehillim, and he in there he has the following quote. Okay. He says as follows: I think we delight to praise what we enjoy, because the praise not merely expresses, but completes the enjoyment. It is its appointed consummation. It's not out of compliment that lovers keep on telling one another how beautiful they are. The delight is incomplete till it's expressed. It is frustrating to have discovered a new author and not be able to tell anyone how good he is, to come suddenly at the turn of the road upon some mountain valley of unexpected grandeur, and then to have to keep silent because the people with you care for it no more than a tin can in a ditch, to hear a good joke and find no one to share it with. The Scotch Catechism says that man's chief end is to, quote, glorify God and enjoy him forever. But we shall then know that these are the same thing. Fully to enjoy is to glorify. In commanding us to glorify him, God is inviting us to enjoy him. That's from C.S. Lewis. Just one interesting and I think fairly unknown anecdote about C.S. Lewis is that he sort of had Jewish children. So in A Grief Observed, he is talking about the death of his wife, Joy. So she was a very brief sketch of her. She was like a phenom, just brilliant. She finished like high school when she was 14 or 15, and then she like took a couple years off to just read, and then she finished college when she was 19. She married. She was originally Jewish, had 2 sons, and then lost her husband. She ends up becoming an atheist. She converts first to Christianity, then she becomes a communist/atheist. Then she marries C.S. Lewis. He adopts her 2 sons. Then she dies. Her 2 sons, one of them, David, decides to go back to his mother's original religion and becomes a Satmar Chassid. He really gets into it, learns Shechita, he's like an autodidact. He starts learning Gemara, and Lewis wants to accommodate David, so he koshers his kitchen. He takes David out to like buy new pots and pans, and he wants to make sure that his kitchen is kosher for his adopted son. Tragically, David ends up taking his own life. He was diagnosed with schizophrenia, but that's one of the lesser known anecdotes of C.S. Lewis's connection to Judaism. Anyway, the next thing
He taught in Oxford, didn't
he did, yes,
Christ Church, right?
that I don't know. So the next thing I wanted to do is ask some of what I think are going to be fundamental questions to understanding the book. Some of these we're going to address directly. Some of them it's going to take a little bit longer to get back to. But the first question that I would put out to you to just think about, and feel free to answer it or hold on to it and chew it over, is why did Shlomo write this book? We're going to see there's actually a pasuk in Malachim that talks about how prolific Shlomo was. I will quote it to you now. Veidaber shlosha alafim mashal, v'hi shiro chamisha va'elef. So Shlomo said over 3,000 mashalim, parables, proverbs, and his songs were 1,005. So there's a lot that he put out, right?
This is like downtime. This is like downtime for him, right?
Right.
Like he has to like sort of like get his mind to stop racing.
Maybe. I mean, Shir HaShirim is, I would assume, one of the 1,005 songs that he wrote. How did he decide? Okay, this is the one that is forever,
Because
right?
it's not just a song; it's a song of song.
Okay. Whatever. We'll put the question to the side. But whatever reason he had in producing Shir HaShirim, could he have achieved the same thing if it was written as prose as opposed to poetry? Or I don't know if it's poetry, song. I don't know if those are the same or different in your mind. But whatever he was trying to convey, was it essential that he conveyed it as a song as opposed to just saying whatever he, I mean, I don't know. I can't even tell you what the message of Shir HaShirim is, but whatever the message is for you or for him, could he have conveyed it in a different way? And if so, then why would he choose specifically to write it as a song? The last two questions I think are kind of related, which is it is a very strange book on a number of levels. And Chazal very readily pick up on this. One of the things that is so strange about it is that it is completely secular. There is no name of God in Shir HaShirim whatsoever. There are no mitzvos in Shir HaShirim. There is no Torah learning. There's no davening. There's no anything that connects this in any way to Yiddishkeit. To Eretz Yisrael, absolutely. But to Jews and what Jews do, there's nothing in there.
Like the B'nai Yishmael, nothing. No.
They're
No, I'm saying like no, I'm saying like the,
no. There's. I mean,
like
if you can connect it, I'm happy to be I'm happy for you to prove me wrong. What's that?
We don't learn any halachas.
We don't learn any
halachas,
halachas.
right? But I'm saying, but like no
We'll
references
learn
to Yer Kodesh.
Because I'll learn any lessons like me.
So Chazal see the whole story as a metaphor, and we'll talk about one of the things that I think jumps out is there's no name of God. There's absolutely no mention of Hashem in all of Shir HaShirim.
It's not the only.
There's one other book,
I don't remember.
Esther. Esther's the other book. But of all the books, right, you would think if Shir HaShirim is talking about to the point where Chazal actually call attention to this by doing sort of the opposite. They say that every time that it mentions Shlomo in Shir HaShirim, it's really referring to Melech Shahashalom Shalo. It's really talking about God. I'll quote the Gemara. It's in Shavuos. Kol Shlomo Hamurim b'Shir HaShirim Kodesh. Every time it says Shlomo in Shir HaShirim, that's actually a holy name. Shir Lemi Shahashalom Shalo. It's a song to he who shalom belongs to, meaning a Kadosh Baruch Hu. Chutz mi, and then they give you a couple examples where it actually is a legitimate proper name and it's not God's name. Karmi shali lefanai elef lecha shlomo. When at the end of the Megillah, the Raya is talking about, I'm going to keep my vineyard, and Shlomo, you can keep your fancy vineyard, etc. And the other time the Gemara talks about is Hinemi Tato Shlomo Shishim Giborim Sovivla. That remember there was that the palanquin, the bed of Shlomo that was passing through. Yeah, right. It's a weird apirion is the Hebrew, and so that's also an instance where it doesn't sound like that's the name of God. That's actually referring to Shlomo. But the point there is that Chazal are noticing there's no name of Hashem here. So and to make it, I don't know if it makes it better or worse. I guess it depends on your perspective. Unlike the Chumash, where Chazal have a Masorah, right? At Har Sinai, Kadosh Baruch Hu said, "Ayin tachas ayin" does not mean poke the other person's eye out. It means pay them money if you damage them, right? There is no similar Masorah for the psukim of Shir HaShirim. It's not like at Har Sinai, Hashem said, well, in a couple thousand more years, Shlomo's going to show up and he's going to say Shir HaShirim, and here's what it actually means. So when Chazal are darshaning Shir HaShirim, it's their interpretation of Shir HaShirim as opposed to them conveying what the Masorah of Shir HaShirim is, to the point where they argue about how you're like perspective you can take on Shir HaShirim. I want to quote for you from Shir HaShirim Rabbah, to me what is a very interesting machlokas. They take the pasuk Ad Melech b'mesibo, that while the king is in repose, and they're darshaning. What does that phrase mean? So Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda have a machlokas. Rabbi Meir Omer, Ad Melech malchem lachim Hakadosh Baruch Hu b'mesibo. When Hakadosh Baruch Hu, that's the Melech who's in repose, who's kind of relaxing and resting. Where's he resting? Birakia, says Rabbi Meir. So what happened then? So in Shir HaShirim it talks about the raya being decked out with myrrh and all these various spices, and we talked about how some of them don't necessarily smell so good. So Rabbi Meir explains that Nasnu Yisrael Reach Ra, that the Jewish people gave off a bad odor. When did they give off that bad odor? While the king was in repose? That's v'amru la'egel, and that's when they said to the Egel at Har Sinai that Elu Elohecha Yisrael, that these are your God Yisrael. So the pasuk in Shir HaShirim is a reference to Ma'amad Har Sinai, and the part where it's talking about these perfumes that are not necessarily so good smelling. Rabbi Meir says that's a reference to the Jewish people sinning with the Egel HaZahav. So what's Rabbi Yehuda's response? Amar le Rabbi Yehuda, Daicha Meir. No way, Meir, that's enough. Ein dorshim Shir HaShirim l'ganai el l'shvach. You cannot explain Shir HaShirim in a negative way. Not allowed. Why? Because it's Shir HaShirim, and we don't do such a thing. So it seems clear that Chazal are picking up on the fact that it on its surface at least, it feels very much like a secular story, and they're using their own perspective on how to darshan it in order to remove the secular and bring the religious message into it. So how do we understand that? And why would Shlomo do such a thing? Why would he intentionally exclude any reference to God, any religious message? These questions clear? Fair? Okay. So the first thing I want to do to try to start addressing these types of things is talk about who the author of the book was.
One of the questions isn't fair, in so
Okay.
much as Shlomo wrote a lot of things, not all of them were religious.
Shlomo wrote a lot of things, not all of them were right. So actually, let's get into
your question is a good question if you're talking about why is it
in the canon?
Why is it canonized? But
Fair.
In fact,
Okay.
Why is he
writing it? He can write whatever he wants.
Well, he did.
Fair.
And he wrote things that weren't religious, that weren't canonized, that we don't have.
Fair. Okay, so then let's make the question more accurate. I think it's a fair critique.
What's the Ladoros aspect of Shir HaShirim?
What's the Ladoros aspect of Shir HaShirim? We can ask it that way. Why is Shir HaShirim in the canon?
But that the Gemara answers.
Okay, so we're going to talk about that.
Which question becomes a little bit more
That's the Gemara deals with.
weighted by the fact that there's what's the Jewishness of it.
Right. And if Shlomo wrote 1,000 other songs and we wanted to include one of them in Tanakh, could we not find one that was maybe
Perhaps
more
mention
apropos?
God.
Right.
But that's what the Gemara goes through.
Yeah, so we're going to go through that. So the first point to question is,
we don't know when Shlomo wrote it in relation to the other 1,000. Right?
we don't know. No, we don't know that. We do have a statement from Chazal that there's actually machlokas of when Shlomo wrote the 3 books that are in Tanakh. So let's go through this right now. Who wrote Shir HaShirim? So on its face, the assumed answer is Shlomo. What's that?
Shlomo.
Okay, so what does that mean?
Shir HaShirim, Asher l'Shlomo.
Right.
It's to Shlomo.
That is attributed to Shlomo?
Yes.
Okay, so Mishlei starts differently. Mishlei just starts Mishlei Shlomo. These are the Mishalim of Shlomo. Shir HaShirim Asher l'Shlomo is adding in words that you don't find in Mishlei, and Chazal pick up on that, and they offer.
And Koheles, he names himself something else.
Yes. We'll put Koheles to the side. Before we get to Chazal, from having read the Megillah, does it sound like Shlomo is the author? As opposed to, here, let me offer you an alternative. Shlomo is a character in the Megillah, correct? We encounter Shlomo a couple times in the Megillah, at least once or twice.
Bible critics, you'll say there are
No.
there are a lot of people who say that he didn't write.
Not Bible
There
critics.
are lots of them who
Not
say
Bible
it,
critics.
and they go exactly with what you're saying. The style is completely different. You're 100% right. And then there's a whole plethora of opinions that absolutely hold that.
Right.
You're correct.
So where I want to go with it is
That's not the religious approach, but that is
Right.
an approach.
is it possible that Shir HaShirim was written for Shlomo, meaning Shir HaShirim Asher Lishlomo, that is for him, meaning he's a character in the story, and I'm sure people came to court all the time and brought him gifts and all kinds of stuff, right? If the way
And there are lots of people who will say that it wasn't written in his time frame at all.
so that's that
Yeah, 100%.
you're ahead of the game. We're going to get to that.
100%.
We'll get to that in 1 second.
You want a cookie?
I want to go, after you eat one, I eat one.
Okay, so I think what you're referring to is a statement from Chazal in Baba Basra that says that Shlomo was not necessarily the author of Shir HaShirim. In fact, he was maybe not the author of any of the books that are attributed to him in Tanakh. The Gemara says as follows: Chizkiyahu v'siato, Chizkiyahu, and we'll say his court, Kasvu, they wrote the following books, and there's a siman to remember it. The siman is Yimashak. They wrote Yeshayahu, Mishlei, Shir HaShirim, and Koheles. So why does the Gemara think that Chizkiyahu HaMelech wrote Sefer Yeshaya? Any takers on that one? So there's a fairly famous Agadah that Yeshayahu didn't kind of get to the end of his life voluntarily. That his son Menashe, I should say grandson Menashe, put an end to his life, and he didn't necessarily have a chance to write his book. So if he didn't write his book, then who did? We kind of, when we're not sure who an author is, we fold it into someone who we know authored other things. And we know for sure that Chizkiyahu authored at least part of the book of Mishlei. It actually says it explicitly in Mishlei. There's a couple of different people who are listed as authors in Mishlei. Give me 1 second. I think it's Chaf Hey. Kohelet, Mishlei, and Shir HaShirim.
Those are the ones that are
So
Traditionally, it's attributed to him.
so here,
also something
some Tehillim. Okay, Tehillim I know has like 10 authors.
more.
So Mishlei Perek Chaf Hey.
Attributed.
Right.
It's unclear.
Perek Chaf Hey, Mishlei says as follows: Gam Eila. Also, these are Mishlei Shlomo, the parables of Shlomo. Asher he'etiku anshe Chizkiyahu Melech Yehuda. That were he'etiku. How do they translate over here? Copied by Chizkiyahu, the king of Yehuda. So we have explicit psukim that at least in Mishlei, Chizkiyahu, and assuming it's not, when it says Chizkiyahu, it doesn't just mean Chizkiyahu, were involved in the writing of Mishlei. So that at least opens the door for Chazal to say maybe not everything that is attributed to Shlomo was written by Shlomo. I think the way to soften all of that and the way that it's going to make much more sense for Shir HaShirim is that there is a difference between writing the text and publishing the text. By publishing, I mean we have to kind of put ourselves in pre-modern times and understand that just because any sefer was written, Shoftim, right? Just because Shoftim was written doesn't mean that everybody in every shul has a copy of Shoftim and knows that it's part of Tanakh, right? We didn't get a canonized Tanakh until much later, and there are books that are earlier or later that are not necessarily in it, right? We have books that are quoted in the Gemara, like Ben Sira, which is earlier than, let's say, maybe Sefer Ezra. It's quoted in the Gemara, but it's not part of Tanakh, right? So the process of canonization, which is what I want to discuss for a few minutes, is fluid. So when we talk about Chizkiyahu, what's that? Not fluid. Not fluid.
Not fluid.
Okay.
It was canonized. Upon the canonization, the fluidity of it stopped.
So until it was canonized.
You could say it was. You could say until it was canonized, there were multiple Sfarim that were going around.
Right.
Upon its canonization,
That's what
the what you call as being fluid stopped.
Yes. I think we're saying the same thing. Okay. Okay, so just to address the academics for a minute. So academics will tell you that Shir HaShirim was not written by Shlomo. It was written much, much later. Maybe it was written by a woman because it has a very strong female perspective in it. Maybe it's a collection of poetry that they would recite before a wedding. These love songs, the Arabic term is wasifs. Um, they find the reason they will tell you all of this is because they find what are called loan words. They find words that they know were pervasive later on in Persia. Let's say you have kerem, right? Kerem haya lishlomo. We talk a lot about this.
Loan?
What's that? Loan words.
Words that wouldn't have been used in those times.
Right. Apiryon, we said, was not a natively ancient Hebrew word. So if you're finding these words in Shir HaShirim, it must be that Shir HaShirim was written when someone was actually using those words. That's their argument, which is both it's extremely overstated for reasons that they should know better. And we talked about this a little bit when we talked about biblical criticism, which is that when we talk about the canonization process, that came to a close with the Anshe Knesset Hagadola, right? The Anshe Knesset Hagadola are the ones who said, this is in, this is out, end of story, right? And we'll talk about why they did that in a minute. But just like the academics believed that there is a redactor, right? There was their whole theory of the four different authors of the Chumash. They had JEPD and then they had R, right? R was the guy who came in at the end. R stood for redactor, and he weaved together all these disparate stories. And we talked about why that's nonsense, but it's actually very practical when it comes to the rest of Tanakh. Because the Anshe Knesset Hagdola were essentially the redactors. They were the ones who took the final books and published them, made them officially part of Tanakh, and put them in a nicely bound art scroll book and scroll, whatever, and told the Jewish people, here, this is in and this is out, right? So if you find a word that is from later on, there's no reason not to assume that that is a word that was apiryon or kerem or whatever it is could have been used by the Anshe Knesset Hagdola when they're editing Shir HaShirim, just like they were editing any other book that became part of Tanakh.
I mean, if someone's the author and he can speak to birds, you would think he could know about a vocabulary word that's a few years down the
Also
line.
true. Also true.
But,
But you see, that concept has problems also.
Okay.
Because once you say that the redactors were part authors of the text, then how much of it does it really come from? How much redaction went through, and then if it's not really written by the original, it was redacted in order and modified, how much of it really stands?
Right. That's fair. That's fair. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about canonization. We don't have any actual record of on such and such a date. Broke it. You broke the bottle of water.
It wasn't
It's
easy.
being
though.
recorded.
I tried. I tried first.
Okay. Fine.
Couldn't pull it.
I can just get another bottle of water.
No. Challenge
We're
accepted.
men with pocket knives. We're gonna figure this out. Okay. So there is no there's no record of when and how things became part of the canon. We know
the record is Gemara.
the record is the Gemara of what's in and what's not in, but the Anshe Knesset Hagdola was much earlier, right?
Correct.
Things are in the canon before the Gemara.
But the Gemara makes reference to canonization.
Okay, so that's what we're going to talk about. We know that at some point it was closed, and that books like Ben Sira, Jubilees, the books of the Maccabees are not in, right? It was also a gradual process, meaning the Chumash was canonized much earlier, right? Books like Hosea, we're not exactly sure, I'm sure it circulated well before it was officially canonized. And part of the reason that there was a process of canonization, in other words, why didn't it just go on forever? The answer to that is because when you start getting groups that split off from Judaism, you have Samaritans, you have Christians, you have the Essenes, you have all these people who are saying that they're also the Jews and they've got their own text. Then you have to start to define your side of the story, right? We say this is true and they say this is true. And okay, well, here's our holy books and here's your holy books, right? It forces you to kind of decide what is beyond the pale. We get some references to books, like in Sefer Daniel. We talked about Daniel looking through a book, and that was a reference to Yirmiyahu. Ben Sira has a list of books that are part of Tanakh. Josephus has a very extensive list. I think he quotes 22 books because he puts together Eicha and Yirmiyahu, because Yirmiyahu was the author of Eicha, and I think he puts together Shoftim and Rus. So in the absence of like an actual documentation of how things were canonized, we use a proxy, and that proxy is the story of Tumat Yadayim, which kind of goes like this. There was, once upon a time, you had holy scrolls, right? You had the Sefer Hosea, or well, actually it was probably Treasar, or you had Yirmiyahu as a scroll, and you knew that was holy. So if you're keeping it somewhere in your house, where are you going to keep it? You're going to keep it next to something else that's holy. What else does the common person have in their house that's holy? Truma, right? So you take your storage shed of truma, and that's where you keep your holy scrolls. The problem with that is there are other people who want to get to the truma. Those are mice, right? So the mice came and damaged the holy scrolls. So Chazal said, okay, this is a problem. We don't want these Megillas to be damaged, so we're going to decree that if you touch a Megillah that is part of Tanakh, your hands become tameh. So Tumat Yadayim means that if your hands are tameh, then you can't touch the truma. So now people are not going to keep their truma and their holy scrolls together, and that by figuring out which of the scrolls are matame your yadayim, we can figure out, okay, which ones did Chazal view as being in or not in.
Where did you see that? I've never seen that.
That is in a Mishnah on Yadayim that I'm going to read to you right now. Not everyone agrees with this. Dr. Schneier Lyman has a whole book on the canonization process, and he disagrees with this theory, because he says you can have books that people decided are holy but are not necessarily part of Tanakh, and you can have books that people don't believe were written by Ruach HaKodesh but are still part of Tanakh, like maybe Kohelet. But let's read I'm going to read to you actually the Mishnah Yadayim, because I didn't print this out for you. I apologize. The Mishnah says as follows: Kol Kisvei HaKodesh Mitamim Esei Yadayim. All the Kisvei HaKodesh, we'll call them the holy books, make your hands impure. Shir HaShirim v'Koheles Mitamim Esei Yadayim. And Shir HaShirim and Koheles are also Mitame your hands. Rabbi Yehuda Omer.
Mitame your hands. If you touch them, you are mitame.
Yes, if you touch them, your hands are tameh. And again, the Mishnah doesn't explain it, but the understanding is this was a decree. Normally, you wouldn't expect something that's holy to make you tameh. It's holy.
Okay.
But because they didn't want it to get damaged, so they decreed it. They made a takana: if you touch these things, your hands become tameh. So that way, you won't keep them near your truma, because we don't want.
It also kept people away from learning it.
It kept people away from touching it when they wanted to eat their truma.
Or whenever they wanted to be
tahor.
Right. So no learning in Yerushalayim, then I assume.
Something like that, or at least not from the scroll. I don't know. Yeah, it's a fair question.
Okay. Okay.
This is a Mishnah Yadayim 3:5.
That's how the Atzei were born.
Right. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Shir HaShirim Mitamis HaYadayim, Koheles Machlokes. Rabbi Yehuda is not so sure that Koheles is included in this decree of making your hands tameh. Rabbi Yossi Omer, Koheles Einu Mitamis HaYadayim, and Shir HaShirim is where there was a Machlokes. Rabbi Shimon Omer, Koheles Mikuli Beis Shammai, Michumeri Beis Hillel, and Rabbi Shimon ben Azai, he actually makes a testimony as follows: Mekubal ani mipi shivim u'shnaim zaken. I have a tradition from the 72 elders. B'yom shehoshivu es Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah b'yeshiva, on the day that they established Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, right? He's the one that we have in the Haggadah with the white hairs, right? This is a famous day where Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah becomes the Rosh Yeshiva, and they let anybody who wants to come into the yeshiva. So on that famous day, Shimon ben Lakish has a tradition that Shir HaShirim v'Koheles Mitamim Esei Yadayim. Amar Rabbi Akiva. Now Rabbi Akiva gets up and says this whole thing is silly.
Also.
Yeah, it's part of Kisvei Kodesh.
Yeah.
So Rabbi Akiva gets up and he says this whole thing is ridiculous.
How would they have lain in Yerushalayim? I mean, I guess laning rule comes later, much later in either case.
Right.
Okay.
Right. So Rabbi Akiva says, Chas v'sholom, lo nechlak adam miyisrael al shir hashirim shelo titames yadayim.
There's something in between. Like they have like even the Sfardim, they have like the stand-up Torah. They have like that.
Right, something so you're not
handkerchief
touching it.
thing.
Yeah, but still. Anybody who would be anywhere near it potentially can become Tamei.
So Rabbi Akiva says as follows. Chas v'sholom, lo nechlak adam miyisrael al shir hashirim shelo titames yadayim. There is no one in all of the Jewish nation who would say that Shir HaShirim is not matame the hands, meaning, of course, Shir HaShirim is matame the hands, because of course Shir HaShirim is part of Tanakh, right? It has to be a holy book in order to be matame the hands.
How would they write the Sefer Sota?
How would they write this? What do you mean?
For a Sota.
It's not a sefer. That's not part of Kisvei Kodesh. You can write a pasuk. You can write. It's
by memory?
Writing a book. Oh, how? Yeah. I mean, you open up a Sefer Torah.
Because they would be in Beit HaMikdash by that.
Yeah, they'd have to open it up.
Well,
They
we know
couldn't
that
open it.
we know
They
that they
couldn't
read
open
the
it up
Torah.
if they open it up.
We know they read
Right.
the Torah in the Beis Hamikdash. We know that.
How could you do? You got to be so careful because you touch
Right.
it.
You have to do.
Hey,
Yeah.
Be careful. Okay.
People became Tommy in the basement. Happens.
So let's hear what Rabbi Akiva has to say. She'ein kol ha'olam kulo kadai kayom shenitam bo shir hashirim liYisrael. Because there is no day that was as amazing as the day that the Jewish people received Shir HaShirim. Shekol aksuvim kodesh, because all the books are holy. Shir HaShirim is kodesh kadashim. Shir HaShirim is the holiest of the holy. V'im nechleku lo nechleku ela kohelas. And if there was a machlokas, says Rabbi Akiva, it was only about kohelas. Now remember, all of this is sort of back tracing the Masorah, because by the time Rabbi Akiva and everyone shows up, this is way after Anshe Knesset HaGadol have already decided what is in and what is out. Amar Rabbi Yochanan ben Yoshua ben Chomev shel Rabbi Akiva kedivrei ben Azai. So even though Rabbi Akiva makes this very bold statement, we paskin halachically that the halacha is like ben Azai, kach nechlaku v'kach gamru, and that is in fact how they had originally argued over Shir HaShirim and Koheles, and then they decided that no, in fact, Koheles and Shir HaShirim are both in the canon. That is the Mishnah in Yadayim. The Tosefta in Yadayim, Parak Bet, Tosefta Vav, says as follows: Reb Shimon ben Menashe Omer Shir HaShirim mitames Yadayim mipnei shenemra beruach hakodesh. So we get a little bit more information here. Shir HaShirim does impurify your hands because it was written beruach hakodesh. V'koheles eino mitames Yadayim she'eino ela michachmaso shel Shlomo. Koheles is not mitame your hands because it is not written beruach hakodesh. Rather, it is the wisdom of Koheles. Amrulo, they said to him, V'chi lo kasov elazu bilvad. Did Shlomo only write that one book? Hare hu omer avidaber shlosha alafim mashal ve'omer al tosif al dvarav. And then they quote the pasuk that I mentioned to you before, that Shlomo wrote 3,000 parables. So if we have a book of Shlomo's parables that are only 30 chapters or 31 chapters, it must be that those have some special significance to them. Now we get to what I think is the most interesting point. There's a Mishnah in Avos de Rabbi Nassan. So Avos de Rabbi Nassan, we all know Perkei Avos. Avos de Rabbi Nassan is kind of like a different version of Perkei Avos, in the same vein of the fact that like the Tosefta is a different version of the Mishnah. Some of it is the same one to one, and some of it is very different. In Avos de Rabbi Nassan, Parak Aleph Mishnah Dalad, we get the following statement. Berishona, in the beginning, hayu omrim mishle v'shir hashirim v'koheles genuzim hayu. They originally said mishle, shir hashirim, and koheles should be genuzim. It should be taken off the market, right? We're going to dig into what genuzim means in a minute. Shehem hayu omrim mashalos ve'enon min haksuvim, because these are all just parables and they're not part of the ksuvim, meaning they're not part of Tanakh. V'amdu v'ganzu. And they stood and they took it off the marketplace. Ad shebo Anshe Knesset HaGedola, until the Anshe Knesset HaGedola came, upirshu, and they explained these three books, and therefore we reestablished the fact that no, they should in fact be part of the canon. Okay, what does that tell us?
It tells us that there were people who disagreed strongly that they should ever be canonized.
There are people who disagreed strongly.
It wasn't always a foregone conclusion that these books were part of it.
Okay. One of the, yeah, no? Any other takers? It wasn't a foregone conclusion. Why was it not a foregone conclusion?
Because there were the votes against it.
Why would there be votes against it?
Because they didn't, there were things that were written that were canonized were for the Doros, and the things that were not canonized were not for the Doros. That's what the Gemara says. So therefore the concept would be that the thoughts that were in those Sfarim that weren't canonized were perhaps written in Ruach HaKodesh, but were not meant for the next generations, future generations.
So why would they think that Shir HaShirim is not for future generations?
Too easily to.
Because they read it superficially.
Right.
They read it based on just the words. It's a love song. It's a love story.
You could say many reasons. You could say many reasons. You could just say that it was written in Ruach HaKodesh only for that dar.
But what would change then? I guess
Well, there are many Sfarim that supposedly were written with Ruach HaKodesh that weren't canonized.
I'm saying what it says in Avos Rabbi Nosson is they originally took it out of circulation, right? So it was originally in circulation.
You're asking why did they take it out of circulation?
I'm asking two parts. Why would they take it out of circulation? And then why would the Anshe Knesset Hagdola come and say, no, these actually belong in circulation?
Okay.
Something had to have changed.
There must have been a reason to take it out. The reason to take it out was whatever it was. And they're like, no, keep it in.
So explain that. Why would they take it out? If something is around and people are treating it as a holy book, you have to have a reason to censor it, right? You have to have
let's stop. You have to have a reason to say, let's stop. If it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Are they afraid that
Or at least
maybe
something
it'll
was
be
broken.
interpreted incorrectly?
That's exactly what I'm suggesting. What I'm suggesting is that
It already was.
No, but I'm saying, but as generations go on, and as they know that the generations are going to get weaker, and then also interpretation is going to get more
And that's how we ended up
perverted,
with,
for lack of a
with,
better word,
Avodah
more
Zarah.
corrupt, and then it's just going to be like this. I don't know, whatever it becomes.
and then what changed? So
Then-
they
then-
read Shir
then
HaShirim
it has to
and
be-
they're
then
like,
it has to be censored then, 20 generations later. You know,
what I'm saying is they read Shir HaShirim, right? At some point before the Anshe Knesset Hagdola, it was in circulation, it sounds like, right? So people were reading Shir HaShirim. Then someone, doesn't say who, Rishona, said, this book, no, this book is not going to be on the shelf at Eichler's. Why would they say that about Shir HaShirim? You're saying because it's not something that is worthy of being around for generations. You're saying because maybe eventually it will not be worthy.
Not that it wasn't worthy of it. Its message was for a generation. That was it.
Its message was temporal. It was not eternal.
Correct.
I'm saying
Okay.
that they saw the birth of these multiple version translations happening right then and there. And it was just going to continue on.
That's really interesting. You're saying that before the Anshe Knesset
Just
Hagdola,
like
someone
what
looked
we
at Shir
said, yeah.
HaShirim and said, somewhere down the road, someone's going to make a mistake with this book. So let's pull it.
Right here. Right
Oh, they
in this generation.
Right now,
Small,
if it
small mistakes.
if
and
it
now it's
ain't
going to
broke,
get bigger
don't
and
fix
bigger
it,
as
right?
generations
But
go.
clearly something was broken. Like, no, okay, all right. This is the damage. Compared to the good that this book is going to bring, we feel that the damage that it could cause, or the damage that it currently is causing, and where it could lead to, let's just play it safe and avoid. To which the Anshe Knesset Hagdola said, no, leave it.
To which the Anshe Knesset Hagdola said
It's
that
a necessary evil.
it's even if people will make mistakes, we still believe that there's value in it.
We know that people have made mistakes with that and many other books of the Torah. I mean, that's not nothing new.
For sure.
You know,
For sure. Okay. If that's how we're going to interpret it, I think then it makes the question that we started out with even stronger, which is what is the book about from a religious perspective, and why was it written in a way where people could make mistakes? If there's a message in here, let's assume, like all of the midrashim describe, this is really just a mashal for the love of Klal Yisrael to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, or the neshama, and whatever the religious message is, why could it not have just said that? Why would Shlomo write a book, or Chizkiyahu, whoever it is, publish a book that could be so misconstrued? If the message is very simple and straightforward, then just say the message. Why write it in a?
But that could be said for Solanas Farm. That's not limited to this
Like?
one. Eov.
Okay.
Eov is real simple. I mean, look at the machlokas of who wrote it. It's the same question as who wrote it. There are some multiple things. And if the message is just, if you say the message of Eov is, believe in God and just have faith and don't question, then just say that, and why go through the whole story?
So Eov was never taken out of circulation. It was never viewed as a danger, right? There's a whole journey there of like poor interpretations that have to be contended with to show why they're poor interpretations. This book was too hot for the printer at a certain point, and they pulled it off the shelf. And then they changed their mind and said, no, actually, we want to make that. That's all I'm trying to dig into. And I don't know that we have a good answer yet. But I think the question is important. I think that there's something about how the book is written from that shows, at least at a certain point, people must have been making a mistake, right? If everyone was reading this as a mashal, then there's no reason to take it off the shelf, right? There's no reason to question why should it be part of Tanakh. Everyone got the message. There must have been a problem that then either was overridden or was okay. There's a problem, but it's too worthwhile to let the problem sort of dampen the whole. Right. That I think is the question, and I want to leave that as something to hopefully bother you a little bit until next week.
I'm gonna leave that hanging.
I am.